Good evening. Yeah, I want to welcome you to Spiritual Therapy Live. I'm Ebony Blackman Humphrey, and we're live Monday night, 8 p.m. Um, Mountain Time. So the last time we met, we were talking about, um, synthetic psychology, um, where robots are currently being built, and um, they are working extremely hard to enable um, these beings to tap into a brain in human brain power, to say that these robots will have the capacity to engage in certain behaviors that appear to be human. Um, so we're gonna pick up from where we left off. Um, I hope that life has treated you fairly since the last time that we met. So today I'm not gonna share slides as I've been doing in weeks previous, because I think we have the concept when it comes to spiritual death. So if this is your first time joining us, what we're talking about is the different facets of our being. And I guess for a recap, I can show my slides to enable those of you who are new to us as to what it is that we were talking about when it comes to spiritual death, just so that everybody who watches this presentation will have a good idea of what spiritual death is. Let me pull this up so that we can recap. Okay, and then I'll just show my slides here. I gotta get back to the screen, so let me show my slides. It wants to show my desktop, but okay. I'll show my desktop. So let me hit present to everyone, and then I'll pull up the slides here. I hope that it's showing visually. So we were talking about the different components of our being, and we were interested in the fact that we were created as triune species, meaning there are three unique components to our humanity that conceptually gets us to a place where we can identify ourselves as human creatures. So as you see here, we were talking about a tree, and the essence of that tree was an analogy that we use in comparison to. And the essence. I'm just checking to see if my feed is showing, and it's showing, so that's good. So we were using the tree as an analogy, as I was saying, to better explain the experience that we have as humans, to say that there are components to us that encompasses branching, and but all of that, the capacity of our humanity is housed within a seed, and put in the right environment, that seed would germinate, and there will, the root systems will start to take place, and there are certain elements of that tree begins to branch out as it's looking for the right nutrients. And so, and as that tree develops or experiences adversities in its development, that the growth is retarded, meaning it's halted, it's stopped. And so the difficulty becomes, that branching either falling off because it has experienced a number of adversities over a length of time, or, that tree or that branching, so to speak, experiences adversity, and a branch breaks. However, it still is the integrity is there, meaning that it's not going to fall down as you see this tree withering, but it does become obvious that there's something clearly wrong with certain areas or certain sections of that tree, because it's not as fruitful as another branch or another part of the tree. So we were using the tree, and as you see here, it says tree people, and that's what we have kind of been talking about. And our last session, we tied into this concept of spiritual death, how our humanity is tangible, so much so that individuals can create it, conjure it in a laboratory, and superimpose the complexity of our humanity onto inanimate objects. And being robots are inanimate. And so we were talking about how, despite the fact that you can create a robot in a laboratory setting, that there's a divine nature that the robot cannot possess. Meaning, and we were using the example of a mother, and I'm gonna turn my screen back just so that as I'm talking here, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And so we were using the example of a mother or a father role to say that those elements of our humanity are divine. We don't understand how a mother knows how to be a mother. And the intuition component of that experience is hardwired, it's ingrained, meaning when the baby cries, there's certain components of a woman's brain that's activated. There's certain chemicals like oxytocin, pitocin, all of these different chemicals that are emitted from the brain because the woman hears her child cries. And so that's divine. We cannot explain it. We cannot conceptualize why it is the case, but it is the case. And so we were talking about also how, being a father is divine, that there's components to that experience that one cannot, conceptualize because it's divine in nature, meaning that a mother who has children, she takes authority not just over her child or her children, she takes authority over her household. And the man, so to speak, he is in a role that's dominant, and in all actuality, he becomes Lord over his wife, and he becomes Lord over his children. And so the object of that experience is that he is supposed to go out and he is supposed to provide. He is supposed to have means to be able to support his family. And we were saying how these things are divine in nature, because there's certain women who they're not motherly. It's not been given to them, and so they don't bear children. And so if you look in the context of scripture, I like when it talks about an ostrich, and it says that how an ostrich, when was created, was not given wisdom, to the point where when the ostrich lays her egg, she immediately gets up and walks away. She isn't nurturing as a hen. She's not nurturing as a duck. She doesn't have compassion for the child as other subspecies. She is arrogant, and her feathers are very flamboyant, and she's very temperamental, the ostrich is. And so when you think about the context of our humanity, I'm saying that there are elements within the facets of our being that are so complex that they cannot be understood or explained. And which hence is the fact that we are not just tangible beings where we can see each other, touch each other. We are spiritual beings that have a power source that enable us to be able to function within the domain of our earthly sphere. And so we were talking about how there are components that are supernatural and superimposed up on its creatures that we cannot even articulate the facet of that which is divine. Meaning we cannot explain love and how we can give it and receive it, though it's not something you can see. We see the effects of love, but we can actually see it as a substance. We see the effects of anger. We feel anger, right? And we were talking about how these things are intrinsic, meaning these things happen internally, and you being a spirit being and I'm being a spirit being, when you're engaging in behavior that's spiritual, the perception from a spiritual perspective is that I can feel the love, I can feel the hate, I can feel the disgust, I can feel the discontent. These are all things that are within us as human species, which is to say that there are components to our humanity that should not be tampered with. Because if you open Pandora's box, here comes a whole slew of things out that will not willingly go back in. And so we were talking about how they're creating robots with this synthetic psychology that's programming them to be able to respond in the same light as a human would. Meaning, if you touch it the wrong way or give it the wrong command, maybe it appears confused. If you put a demand on it, it's angry, right? But then we know that though they can tamper with that in the laboratory, they can't interfere with the complexity of human decision making, because not all humans respond to one situation the same way, right? So in light of spiritual death, one of the things, or one of the takeaways from this session, I would hope someone would have is if they can tamper with human emotion, human feeling in a laboratory, then what does that say about what we feel, right? Is what we feel, are those things artificial? Are those things so superficial that they can be, added on to and subtracted, right? So that's why this the umbrella of these sessions are called spiritual death. because it's easy to feel left alone. It's easy to feel abandoned. It's easy to feel neglected and depressed and overwhelmed and forgotten about. All of these things that are negative. But the key to understanding these emotions that seem to override us and cause us or influences our decision making is to understand where they come from, right? Because if we can understand where they come from, there's a better chance at being able to handle certain situations that seem to dominate us in situations that we're in. So the last time we met, I had pulled up an article, and so let's see here. I'm trying to locate. Excuse, my computer is moving. I want to try to get this article, and so this article was very intriguing. Very intriguing. And so as I read, it talked about consciousness is one of the last frontiers of science, right? Where we don't even know how to think about the problem yet. Consciousness, right? Consciousness is so intricate that there's different levels to it. Okay. And so one of the things that I've learned is when you feel disconnected, let's just take sadness, right? Sadness is a human emotion. And let's take a little girl with an ice cream cone. Let's use her. She has this ice cream cone, and the cone is one of those waffle cones. And she has 2 scoops of, some vanilla ice cream. And as she's walking, she's not paying attention to the drop in the ground. And so she steps down, not realizing that there's a depth there, and so she trips and she falls and she drops this ice cream cone onto the ground. And so immediately this little girl is sad, and she's sad because her ice cream has fallen down. Now an onlooker could say, oh, she's sad because she dropped her ice cream. But is her sadness tied to something so superficial as her ice cream falling and she liked vanilla? Or is her sadness tied to a more complex experience? Meaning, has this little girl been asking for ice cream for weeks or days and couldn't get anyone to respond? Or has this little girl lost someone, and to help soothe her aching soul, someone went and got her ice cream cone? Why am I using these examples? I'm using these examples like this because the consciousness of the experience has relevance to the emotion we choose at a particular time. Meaning, if this girl lived a sheltered life, meaning, someone was constantly, maneuvering to prevent her from experiencing sadness or disappointment, then one could say this little girl wouldn't know anything about that, especially if something like that happened and then her mom comes to the rescue and says, okay, let's get another one. Let's get a bigger one than that. That's okay, that fell. So when you think about the consciousness that we endure, and the emotions that we experience as a result of our conscious state, that affects our response situationally. So the key then becomes, when you are experiencing an emotion, why not have a smorgasbord of emotions present at the time a situation arises, and you intellectually choose an emotion that has nothing to do with something that is automated, meaning you just choose sadness. Out of all the emotions to choose, you just choose sadness, right? That means then when something happens to you, you then now say, I have a slew of responses to engage in, and I can consciously choose between these emotions. Meaning, if you're in a relationship and the relationship is draining and consuming, okay, the auto, I want to say, it's automated to choose anger or disappointment or sadness. Those things are automated. But what's not automated is to say, oh, you know, I'm gonna, instead of being angry, I'm gonna be happy. I'm gonna choose happiness, because this relationship is not working for me, because it's causing more negative emotions to arise versus positive. And so I can't make a sound decision with a negative emotion, because negative emotions exert more energy. It takes more energy to respond negatively to a situation, right? Because the body now has to crank up and get, press all cylinders in order for you to be mad and to carry out the acts of that anger, right? So if you know that a situation is bad for you, and the situation is more cumbersome than it is relieving, it releases, more norepinephrine versus dopamine, then you have a choice, a conscious choice, that you could say, this is causing me to be in a state that I do not like. And so instead of me engaging in behavior or a behavior that I will later have to choose another emotion and have to experience the feelings of guilt and shame and remorse, I'm going to be overjoyed. And that's why the scriptural context says to count it all as joy when there's a testing of your faith. And I've never, I used to listen to that and think, okay, I think that's more easily said than done. And then you come into a state of consciousness. And that state of consciousness says, oh, I can choose something different. I can choose another emotional response outside of being angry because this situation is testing me. I can choose to be elated in a situation versus upset in a situation. And that, when you are engaging in that, you can think clearer. You can clearly see the situation for what it is. You clearly understand that you have a choice. And that's where the frustration comes in. When you feel as though you don't have a choice. When you feel as though everything that you are experiencing, you're only left with one option. But I'm telling you, friend, that's not true. You have an option. We all have options. We're never put in a situation where we are left with one door. There's always two doors. Either you're going to get angry or either you're going to choose something else. And when you get angry, the issue with anger is that it taps in to your ability to think consciously in a situation. And that's why I know in having patients that's why they say they black out or they weren't thinking, because anger disrupts your ability to think logically in a situation. And so that's why it's key. It's key for you to understand the complexity of how we were made so that we intellectually go about life making right decisions, better decisions, right? There's only so I use a analogy of candy. When I was younger, I loved Now & Laters, right? And I would take, it was a pack of Now & Laters that would come in this little square pack, and they were individually wrapped, and they were stacked on top of each other, and then the wrapping on the outside. And so, with such impatience, I would just tear through the outer layer, and I would just shoot for the Now & Later, especially the green apple. I wanted it. I liked the way the green apple tastes. And so, I would start eating them to the point where I would eat them so fast, it's like I couldn't sit and enjoy it, right? And I would just consume it. And so the reason why I'm giving you this example is because when we're so speedy about things, and we're not taking the time to digest and understand, we're engaging in behaviors where we don't even know exactly what we're doing because we're doing things too fast. And when you are doing things so fast that your mind cannot catch up, or you can't catch up with your mind, you're going to make decisions, friend, that's going to have a lasting impact on you. And then when it's time to sit down and say, well, what happened? You can't remember exactly what happened because you tore through that situation so abruptly. And so that's why, I feel led of the Lord to sit down here with you on Monday nights and help you to understand how we were made, so that we can make better decisions, so that we can have a long life, a productive life that causes us to win, and that disconnect that we feel internally will dissipate as we become more knowledgeable about who we are, why we are, right? We weren't just put on a planet that's constantly spinning. We were put here for a purpose and for a reason. We all have purpose. Purpose is down in the inside, right? And as we began this journey to understand, who we are and why we are, then we become open to a spiritual life, a spiritual dimension that causes us to live, that enable us to be in the know, to walk in the newness, to walk in the power, to live in that power, to speak in that power, to eat and demand in that power, so that we become victorious in all situations, not some of them, right? I don't believe that it is the will of God that we should perish, that we were created to just be sent to the slaughter and die. There are so many people that are dying without cause, and it's unnecessary. And that's because, when you're not maneuvering in purpose, right, you're dying as a result of disconnect. Because when you're disconnected spiritually, the emotions begin to flood your consciousness, and all of the emotions are pressed down at one time, right? In psychiatry, we call that schizophrenia. We call that bipolar mania, because all of the emotions are pressed down, all of the emotions. And it's hard to stay in one emotion and to function in that emotion and prosper in that emotion and see fruitfulness in that emotion, because all of the emotions are pressed down. They're pressed down, and when they're pressed down, it makes our consciousness skewed. We can't see reality from what we feel, and that is not a successful life. Feelings are counterintuitive to a degree. They can work against you. You can, and I've said this to people, you can feel for a hamburger the same way you feel for a person. So that lets you know that our emotions and what we feel are unpredictable to the point where we can confuse what they're used for, what they're needed for. And that's how you see people that have issues with overeating, because they're eating with their emotions. The emotions are never satisfied. They're never content, because because they're flooding your consciousness, and you think you're hungry, but you're not hungry. You're emotional, and the response then is to satisfy your emotions, to appease your emotions. But by the time you appease your emotions, you 50, 60 pounds overweight. And that's why, Spiritual Therapy Live is to help us to be able to reconnect, help us to be able to understand why it is that we feel the way we do, and how can we take a spiritual prescription that will enable us to be mentally and spiritually well, because that is the reason in which we were made. The scriptures say that you shall prosper even as your soul prospers, meaning that your outside experience should not dominate your internal experience, meaning these things should be unilateral. There should not be a up for one and a down for another, because if there's a up for one and a down for another one, you are disjointed, meaning there are some times that you can function and thrive, and then there's other times where you cannot. And that is a life that is so disjointed that anything can pass through there. And that's how when we're receiving spiritual elements like hate and bitterness and envy and jealousy from someone else, they can intercept you because you are disconnected. But the moment we become connected, someone's experience is in life, whether jealousy or envy, you cannot penetrate something where there's no opening. You need an opening. I said this to someone. I said, I have to allow you to make me mad. What you're saying will fall on deaf ears if I don't allow you to do what it is that you're trying to do. I have to give you permission to make me upset, right? And if I let you make me upset, it is more my fault than it is yours. Because if your spiritual experience, your internal experience in life is that you are an envious person, a jealous person, then let that be unto you. Let that be unto you. Because one of the fascinating things that I have discovered as I continue, my quest in understanding the connection between the human soul and human interaction, is that a person who is experiencing negative emotions, they never want to keep it to themselves. They're constantly wanting to disseminate. They want to give their internal world to everyone on the outside to make you feel the way they feel. They want to share, right? Like love. You want to share love, and I love everybody, and I love you. That's the same way. Love is a spirit. It's not something you can tangibly see. But just like envy and jealousy, rage, they don't want to internalize it to the point where it just becomes their rage, their anger about them, what they aren't doing, what they can't do. They want to disseminate it to others, because the concept is, if I can make you as miserable as me, then there is no competition between that substance, because you are as I. And so now we have something in common. Now we can sit amongst each other and there be not a battle between us because you feel like me, right? That's a great point to end on, right? We have to understand, what this is about. And I am of the opinion, I don't believe a robot could be able to, could have the ability to harness the decision-making trees that we go through as humans. It's just far out of space. It's out of reach. And so I'm just baffled at the concept that, they're building these things and they're on their way. Artificial intelligence, I really don't think can match human relationships. I really don't, because they're complex. And so anyway, I want to thank you for joining me on Spiritual Therapy Live. We're going to continue on this topic until, God gives me the mind and we switch up and we talk about something else. But I think this is, noteworthy, understanding why it is that we feel the way we feel, and understanding that our emotions are not, do not have authority over our consciousness. They do not have the ability to override our ability to make a decision. We can make a decision despite our emotions, right? That is what makes one spiritual, is when you can make decisions despite your emotions. Okay, so I want to encourage you. I want to say that I'm praying for you, and I'm believing that these sessions are helpful or will be helpful to those that view or will view, and that you would subscribe to our channel at Ebony Humphrey, that you would check us out on our webpage at ebhministries.com, that you would like us on Facebook. And so, again, I want to say thank you until we meet next time next week, same time, 8 p.m. Mountain Time. I want to say have a great night, and I'll see you next week.